Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Rocky Tong, and I'm the Director and Head of Policy Research for the Financial Services Development Council. Today, we are very great that you are with us. For that, we are launching a report entitled Careers of Tomorrow, Financial Talents in the Digital Sustainable Economy of Hong Kong. We are very delighted to have four fine speakers with us. Well, let me start with Stephen. Stephen is a board member of the FSDC. He's also the Senior President and Executive Director of Public Policy Institute, our Hong Kong Foundation. He also led our, a working group as the convener of the Human Capital Committee. Next, we have Mr. Jeffrey Tang. He's a member of the Talent Strategy Working Group. He, in his day job, he is a partner with EY, and he is, responsible for people advisory services with the company. Next, we have Ms. Zoe Lau. She is also a member of the Talent Strategy Working Group. In her day job, she is the General Manager and Head of Human Resources and Corporate Communications Division at the Bank of East Asia. Last but not the least, we have Dr. King Au. He is the Executive Director of the FSDC, who runs our operation. Today's session, we are setting aside 1 hour for today's session, and we are breaking it down into 3 major parts. The first part being a presentation of the key recommendation and the introduction of the paper. This is going to be done by Stephen. After that, we have prepared some questions for the panel, whereby the panel will be sharing some thoughts in relation to the topic. After that, we will be opening up the session for Q&A session, and please do input your answers and questions to the chat box, and I'll be able to see it and consolidate it and ask the panelists about it later. But at the end of this, do stay with us for 2 minutes as we are going to consolidate the feedback from you. Now, let me pass the floor to Stephen, who will be making an introduction of our report. Stephen, please.
Thank you, Rocky. Glad to be able to share with you this important report because, as you know, obviously, talent development is the crucial element as the financial center globally for Hong Kong in the future. So let me just briefly run over the presentation. It's divided into 2 parts. First part is we have done a relatively large survey to understand the landscape in sort of the talent development areas. And second part is our policy recommendation. Let's just go right through it. And our report also covered the 2 main themes, as you can see. One is digital, where we cover fintech, and sustainability, where we cover ESG and green finance. So let's just go right through it. The methodology part of this presentation is we have reviewed the next page. We have reviewed more than 20 different literature, where obviously have other studies on these themes. Hopefully we can actually build on these studies and actually find out more perspective for you. So we divided into 2 different perspectives. One is from the employer's perspective, where we have spoken to very senior people in the C-suite's office. We have spoken to industry associations as well as HR professionals. And then employees part is actually we have done a survey with 200 tertiary institution students and then 200 incumbents practitioners. So a total of 400 people from the employees' perspective. So we can able to look at both ESG and fintech from both sides of the perspective, employers and employees. Next page. Let me just go through some of the findings. Before I go into fintech and ESG, this slide is just to show you that both industry practitioners as well as tertiary students from an employee perspective, I guess, are actually quite optimistic for the future of the financial industry, which is a good news because obviously we wanted the prospective employees as well as the current employees having faith and hope in the development of the industry itself. And then we go into the fintech perspective. Fintech is, in our report, we obviously listed out, the next page, please. In our report, we obviously listed out sort of the different categorization of fintech and what it means by fintech, and there are a lot of definitions. We can go into that. And so on the bottom left-hand corner, we talked about some of the common themes that we discovered the employers and employees both shared. For example, the area of trend is big data, cybersecurity, etc. And both of them, both employer and employees are obviously understood the need to upgrade and reskill themselves. But there are gaps nonetheless. For example, there are the misconception that what is fintech? Does fintech guaranteed high-paying jobs, and what does it mean to be doing fintech? Is it just coding or programming, or is it actually also involve a lot of project management as well? And if you looked at our survey finding from an employee perspective, how many of those are willing to consider fintech as the future career? Actually the numbers are quite high, particularly for the tertiary students. For example, the numbers there, 80% of the tertiary students, the prospective employees, consider or very likely to consider that they will actually enter into fintech as their career of choice. And if you look at the business faculty particularly, the percentage is even higher, to 92.7%. So obviously people realize, the students realize that, fintech is an important sector, which is great because obviously we need students to be excited for this new development area. And the next page, if you ask the industry practitioners, they talk about sort of different ways of getting retrained or upskill themselves. Obviously on the job training is important. Off the job. Recording in progress. Off the job training. Apologies. Off the job training is also important. But however, you can look at the chart on the right hand side in terms of the satisfaction of the quality of the programs. They are fair, I think. A lot of the people ranked score 4 to 7 or 8 to 10 is fair, but there are obviously room for improvement as well. And then we go into the ESG findings. If you look at sort of the commonalities between employers and employees, they will agree that the ESG regulations and integrated analysis are the hard skill in need. But nonetheless, again, there are gaps as to the understanding of ESG and its implications. If you look at the next slide, we also ask the prospective employees or the employees, whether they feel they themselves has understanding of the ESG market. Well, what is interesting there is that only 50% of the industry practitioners feel that they have some understanding or ample understanding of the ESG job market. So we know the job market, so we will probably talk more about it. The job market is growing, but I think not a lot of people feel that they have enough or good understanding of the market. But fortunately, the tertiary institution students seems to fare better. A lot of them feel like they have some understanding or ample understanding of the ESG market generally. Now, in terms of switching into the ESG sector or develop a ESG career, the number is not as high as the fintech numbers that we just looked at, but nonetheless it's still relatively high. For example, 61.5% of the tertiary students are actually considering the ESG as their career in the future, and obviously that number is even higher for the business students, is about 73%. So again, I mean, these numbers portray some positive awareness of the students and employees for both the fintech and ESG market to a different extent, but nonetheless there are obviously room for improvement, which is why we're turning into the next page for recommendations. Let me just spend another 5 minutes to go through all these recommendations. The details are in our reports. Our recommendations are sort of have basically break down into three different segments: undergraduates, the junior employees, as well as for increasing middle to senior management talent. And then we have the overall recommendations for talent development in the financial industry generally. And then we also have Fintech and ESG specific recommendations overall. So it's a total of 6 recommendations. Number one, we have looked into some of the qualification framework by the Education Bureau, particularly related to the Industry Training Advisory Committees, the ITAC, set up by the EDB. We feel that this ITAC can consider to widen up the scopes to cover other sectors, in addition to insurance and banking, which is currently under, under the ITAC, but there are other areas that are not included, for example, asset and wealth management. Recommendation 2, we also recommend that the FSDB may consider to be the coordinator and delegating a body to systematize the offerings of internship and apprenticeship programs in the financial industry that are run solely and jointly by the government and its agencies. The reason is being that obviously we acknowledge the importance of these sort of internship and apprenticeship program for students to be able to get hands-on experience early on. But we do feel that by talking to the stakeholders that there are consolidated effort and integrated effort is necessary, because there are a lot of programs out there right now. Recommendation number 3 is to facilitate Hong Kong's professional overseas and mainland placement through subsidy support. This is not necessarily new. Obviously, we already have programs to encourage young people to find jobs in the Greater Bay Area. However, we feel that this sort of thinking can also expand into general international placements, and obviously with condition of having given them subsidies to go abroad and find jobs. They need to come back after the international exposure, because after all, a global financial center is not necessarily a local perspective. Also, we need a regional as well as global perspective to be more competitive globally as a global financial center. Recommendation number 4 is to incentivize private fintech enterprises to participate in curriculum development and application, which is important. We all know that some of the curriculum in schools are not necessarily the most up to date, but in order to get industry participations, aside from volunteering, they do need to be incentivized and subsidized to actually participate and help out, given everyone is sort of have limited resources. So particularly, we also suggest that the UGC, the University Grants Committee, may consider advising its funded universities to add private sector participation into fintech-related curriculum design, which is also important as you all know, UGC is sort of holding the key leverage or key lever as to what the universities, even though the universities have their own say as to what to teach, but the UGC obviously have holding a considerable leverage as to what is actually being included in the school generally. Recommendation number 5, introduce ESG courses as compulsory learning in finance-related disciplines. And particularly, we recommend that the universities may consider introducing ESG courses as compulsory credits for undergraduates with a major in business-related subjects. I think this is in line with the general development of ESG as an integral part of the financial industry landscape. So it's not necessarily a segregated discipline, but actually is an integrated whole with the financial industry, and therefore it may make sense to actually be considered to be a compulsory credits going forward. And lastly, recommendation number 5 is to expand the continuing education fund with reimbursable courses to cover more professional training in fintech and ESG. Specifically, we recommend that the Labor and Welfare Bureau, which is in charge of the CEF, the Continuing Education Fund, may consider injecting further flexibility to the course and operational framework of the CEF in a timely manner, as As we pointed out in our research, there are restrictions and limitations, particularly in the pandemic era, where some of the courses are basically, sort of not going so well. So we thought that the CEF in particular can consider to be a key for upskill and reskill for a lot of our talents to acquire more fintech and ESG skills going forward. So I think there are a lot more interesting findings, and hopefully you can look at our report and you will see that some of the feedback from the employers and employees going forward. So I think I will give the time back to Rocky.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Stephen, for the very concise presentation about what we have covered in the report. Indeed, this exercise is a very interesting one. For that, both ESG and fintech have appeared to be very important topics in the financial services sector, and it looks like students should be aware of what's going on from now onwards. Now, we have designed some questions, and this will, after the presentation of Stephen, we are going to move on to the panel discussion, as I mentioned before. And the very first question is for me to ask my executive director, Dr. King Au. He is, like I said earlier, he is responsible for the operation of FSDC. And now I would like to ask him why talent strategy is important to the development of Hong Kong's financial services sector.
Thank you, Rocky. But first of all, I would like to thank Stephen, Zoe, Jeffrey, as well as other working group members for their valuable contribution towards the publication of this very important talent strategy paper. While Hong Kong is well recognized as an IFC, as evidenced by being ranked 4th in the latest Global Financial Centers Index published in March this year. While we have a very vibrant stock market, with Hong Kong EX in 2nd place on the global IPO fundraising list last year, we believe the future of global economy will be driven by digitalization and sustainability. Given the financial services sector is one of Hong Kong's most important economic pillars, accounting for over 21% of our GDP in 2019, and providing some 287,000 jobs as of June this year. So we at the FSDC believes a holistic and long-term talent strategy is needed to ensure that we develop a sustainable talent pool for the financial services industry. Which is encouraging to note that the Hong Kong MA stated in its Fintech 2025 strategy that expanding fintech savvy workforce would be a key element of their strategy. It also plans to collaborate with strategic partners through various initiatives, including the industry and academia. On the ESG front, we're also pleased to see that the Green and Sustainable Finance Cross-Agency Steering Group announced the launch of the Center for Green and Sustainable Finance. But the reality, we believe at the moment, only the larger players have come up with a more concrete blueprint as to what skill sets they, as employers, are looking for from the incumbents and potential employees as to how to make sure the overall capabilities of their workforce will remain relevant and competitive. I hope the policy recommendations that Stephen presented earlier can help the respective policymakers and key stakeholders to come up with a long-term sustainable development roadmap for fintech and ESG talents.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, King. Now I will have a question for Jeff. Jeff, I've known you for years now, and I know that you advise corporates, large and big, local and international, on various talent strategies. So this question is carefully designed for you. I would like you to share with us the outlook of Hong Kong's in terms of talent acquisition strategy and capability in the next 3 years and beyond. How attractive is Hong Kong to global talents compared to the other markets?
Thanks, Rocky. Happy to be here. I think one word, you can use the word vibrant, right? I mean, I do think the talent acquisition space is very vibrant today. And when it's vibrant, the one good thing is, I think from the report you can see, more than half of the respondents say they're still very, very positive on this sector. I think that's a good point from a long-term supply perspective. But in the same token, if you talk to a lot of players in the industry, is that finding the right people, it still remain one of the biggest impediment challenges they have in actually growing the business itself. So on one hand, you have positive, but you also have a significant challenge. Now, if you think from the challenge perspective, you use the word fintech, right? I call it fin, and then there's the tech. So on the fin side, you say, hey, hang on, Hong Kong has a lot of financial services, right? We should have ample of talents. Then you have the tech side. But if you think of from a fin, yes, you may have a lot of people like whether it's in banking, credit risk, market risk, people knows banking. The question here remains is, how do you actually bring these technical skills that you have to work in an environment which is very, very different? How do you get a credit risk person to work with a UX designer, in the same room and to discuss products? I think that's something that's different, the ways of working. And how do you work in an environment where it's very different, very unknown, some of the aspect of it. I think on the tech side itself, it's very short at the moment for a couple of reasons. One, you are not just competing between financial services. You also compete with the others tech-related, biotech, meditech as well. And this is where I think this is where organizations start looking at the GP as part of their talent strategy, right? In terms of how do I leverage some of the cloud architecture, some of the data architecture folks, from the GBA region, because realistically, we cannot get all the talent in here. To your second question, I'm very, very optimistic and very positive about Hong Kong. I think Hong Kong would have a unique proposition. We still have a very large international community, which is very, very unique in Hong Kong. It is still a very, very vibrant in terms of the communities, in terms of the players that are entering Hong Kong. I can't recall the stats. I remember hearing how many companies are setting up in Hong Kong. Therefore, I still feel very optimistic and compared to other markets in the region.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Jeff. Now I'm going to turn to Zoe. Zoe, BEA, together with the other, peers from the banking sector, employ huge amount of graduates every year. So I would like to tap a brain and see what you see as the main factors in attracting fresh graduates or experienced professionals to join the financial services industry.
Thank you, Rocky. I'd like to talk about maybe 3 points to this question. First of all, Hong Kong, as we all know, is the leading international financial center with lots of growth opportunity. So one can develop essentially a lifelong career within the same or with multiple institutions. Like myself included, I picked up ESG since last year. So besides corporate communication and HR, I also do ESG. So secondly, banks are really right in the middle of the sweeping impact of fintech and ESG. Personally, I think it's quite hard for someone to find another place that is more exciting. Also, the demands for asset wealth management in the GBA area is huge. So it is a big engine for growth and also for talent demand. The second point I'd like to talk about is that financial services is a multidisciplinary and professional and a regulated business. While financial crisis a decade and a half ago might have shaken the industry a little bit, reforms and efforts by global regulators and industry participants to strengthen the industry is taking shape. And these changes impose even greater demand on talent with multidisciplinary skills, both hard and soft. I'll give a few examples. For instance, as a business manager, you'll have to balance between driving profit and fulfilling the evolving compliance requirements. As a compliance manager, you'll have to help design customer journeys that are in compliance while it's not a strict jacket. Fintech poses additional challenges. For instance, how to ensure KYC, know your customer, is done properly with remote account opening. And as an IT manager, you have to ensure that you are not impacting cybersecurity while supporting mobile developments. So given the discipline and the competency requirements, on-the-job exposure in financial service industry is really valuable. And trained talents are in high demand, both within and outside the industry. Last, professional training and development opportunities are ample in the industry. Most of the banks advise they invest heavily in training, in development from technical know-how to soft skills to hyper development. So there's a lot that are all these, professional training that's available. And besides positions that requires licensing with the Hong Kong MAs or SFC, for instance, Hong MA most recently, starting in 2019, they have the Enhanced Competency Framework. We call it ECF. Just now, Stephen talked about CEF, Continuing Education Funding. This is ECF, so Enhanced Competency Framework, since 2019. And this is growing in breadth and depth, and industry participants are encouraged to attain both core and professional level certifications. So these are all the additional opportunities that one would get if they are in the industry.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Chloe. Now, let me try to summarize the answers from the three fine speakers in, hopefully 30 seconds. King mentioned that, the talent contribution to the sector is extremely important. So he mentioned that, it's a multidisciplinary and, it's a very highly regulated sector. So there are a lot of issues that we have to handle and, hopefully very carefully. Then Jeff mentioned that, he is optimistic about the outlook. However, he has also mentioned that competition could be fierce in certain areas. So now the next question for Stephen is very important because with so much hype and so much challenges we are facing in the sector, why are we picking ESG and fintech out of so many topics?
I think there are three reasons. One is, number one, obviously, as King said, this is a global trend. There is where the opportunities and the market growth are in terms of fintech and ESG and green finance generally. So that's sort of the market forces. Number two is obviously the government, as Zoe said, this is a highly regulated business, and both the local, the Hong Kong government, as well as the global, different governments and regulators have responded. So, for example, our Secretary of FSDC have mentioned that obviously ESG and fintech is one of the couple key strategies going forward for Hong Kong, and therefore Hong Kong MA has launched the Fintech 2025. Right, 2 months ago, and Hong Kong already has a green and sustainable finance cross agency steering group, and they have announced further policy blueprint going forward. So obviously the regulators are acting, and therefore when regulators act in a highly regulated business, and obviously things will happen accordingly. So, but number three is, given that there are market opportunities where the regulators are responding to the market changes, the question then is whether we have enough trained talents to fill these gaps. And obviously, we don't want to just rely on, it is important for Hong Kong to be an attractive place for global talent, which we should. On the other hand, we also should, on a parallel basis, at the same time, train our own talents to fill this gap as well, and which is why we wanted to make sure that all these policy can address some of the impediments that Jeff mentioned, so that our own local talents and young people can have opportunities to grasp these global markets and global trends as well in Hong Kong, for themselves as well. So that's sort of the three reasons why we're doing this.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Stephen. Jeff, I'm going to come back to you with regards to developing Hong Kong's fintech talent. Well, obviously, fintech, like Stephen and you both mentioned, is a global trend. So now, perhaps you can share with us how this is going to mean to the industry in terms of desirable qualities needed for the talents going forward.
Okay, thanks, Rocky. Let me put it in a different perspective. I think if you think about the whole outlook of capabilities or qualities, there's no discussion to talk about, the technical skills. We talk about the AI, the robotics, the cyber, the data, right? I think what is lacking is the other aspect. Because some people use the soft skill, but I call it the core skills to move forward. I'll give an analogy, right? With the advent of internet, there are only a small group of people who actually get the machine running, the cloud architect, the technical folks. But what propelled internet to a whole different realm are the people who actually bring the possibilities of internet. Likewise for fintech, yes, we do need all the technical skills folks, the coders, actually to keep the tech moving. But what really propel the industry moving forward are the folks who are going to have very innovative mind, different learning agility, different adaptability. So with that, I kind of identify what are the key attributes. To me, is the learning agility, right? The ability to learn different things, different ways of solving issues. The tolerance or the ability to navigate ambiguity, right? The unknowns, and having the resilience to do so. How comfortable are we as organization prepared to tolerate iterations, mistakes or failures, and innovate from that cycle in there? And finally, it's about the application of tech. I think this is something that's being missing, right? How to get people to actually look, how do I use tech to serve better purpose for my customers, rather than, okay, how do I do coding? I think we need to reorient our mindset towards that aspect, the core skills, rather than just purely the technical aspect.
Fantastic. Can I check with Zoe then? And now that, Jeff has already mentioned how, the talent landscape would be shifting from, one way to the other going forward in terms of fintech, perhaps you can highlight how you see the impact on the industry from the ESG perspective.
Great, thanks, Rocky. The impact is huge. Actually, Hong Kong MA in its capacity building for future banking paper, which was launched last year, it highlighted that staff ranging from product design and business development to risk management and accounting, they all should be upskilled to acquire the relevant knowledge and green and sustainable banking. And in the FSDC paper we're releasing today, it also emphasized how ESG is cross-disciplinary. As someone who's managing ESG and also hiring fintech for the bank, in general, employers and FIs and bank, overall, we're still seeking individuals who has the creativity, the agility, and the analytical skills. And we will still, in general, look for employees who embody our vision, the culture, and also the values. And we'll continue to favor candidates with regional and international experiences, and also those who are familiar with the local regulations. But if I have to be more specific on ESG, okay, if we're really looking for someone on ESG who will really stand out, so I would say there are 3 qualities. First of all, ESG people or applicants, they really have to be both a generalist and a specialist, because ESG really touches on almost every aspect of company business and operations. It does require someone who have an understanding of the different aspects of a bank, of the FI, but also they possess understanding of sustainability issues and trends. And also they have the research and analytical skills. And second is the ability to envision solutions, because a lot of times to deal with ESG, you have to be the agents of change. Because sustainability solutions, a lot of time, it requires fundamentally new ways of thinking about existing systems and processes. We have to drive change. And therefore, for someone to be able to be a ESG practitioner, they have to envision essentially sustainable business solution in new ways. Last, I kind of touch on this, is business acumen. The ability to understand business model is very important. No matter how passionate a person is about environmental issues, the key is to convince your business audience and also your colleagues in business terms. That means a manager who goes into sustainability role must have understanding of how the bank stood in the competitive context, its business process. You almost have to sell sustainability to stakeholders and to communicate to colleagues in business terms, whether that means financial benefits, operational efficiencies, risk management, the impact on the brand, whether it helps in terms of competitive advantage or employee retention.
You're absolutely right. Love the 3 major qualities, being a generalist and a specialist, being the agent of change, and possess business acumen. I think those are very important points for candidates in the audience. Now, we are still receiving some questions from the audience. So if you have any specific questions, I do encourage you to type it in and send it to us, and then we'll be asking, the panelists afterwards. Now, let me move on to the next point where, I am going to Jeff again. I mentioned earlier that, Jeff, you have been be a very important consultant to large and small firms, both locally and in the region and in the other parts of the world. So I'm sure you are very familiar with the global war for talent. Well, are there any specific approaches that different countries and regions are taking to win the hearts of this global talent?
We're at the hearts and minds.
Hearts and minds, right.
I think if you look at what all the other markets are doing, there are two parts of the equation. One, I call it the hardware part, right? You're talking about immigration policies, right? That's what the tax rates, the regulation. I think that's the hardware part of it. I think think about example, right? How easy is it for us to have an exchange student be here for 5 months or 6 months, right? Do we need 2 months to get the visa to go through for somebody to go through? That doesn't make sense, right? That's one aspect. We talk about the tax rate. Hong Kong, we are pretty much top in that league. So, but this can be replicated, right? The point is that all of this hardware, real markets can replicate. What is harder to replicate is that community, right? I always believe the best attracts the best, right? How do we create a community that's vibrant, that you actually allows people to want to come and congregate together as a team and say, hey, we want to be here because this is where the real actions take place, right? How do we create that? I think quite a number of things other markets are doing. One, if you think about whereby they actually facilitate either through a hardware side, facilitate the importation, or you call it the labor movement. Two, in terms of encouraging organizations to set up the innovation center here. How do I make it easier to make it happen? Thirdly, in terms of the whole ecosystem, right? It's not just, for example, just the main fintech or the virtual bank side, but how about the other ecosystem? How do we create the environment whereby all these organizations like people who want to come to Hong Kong? I think that is harder to replicate. Therefore, I feel that there is a need to undertake a multi-pronged strategy, both from the governments, the policies, organizations, where they want to come here itself, and ultimately, Hong Kong being the right environment where people want to be here. I think that's key.
Absolutely. So now, Zoe, based on your observation, do you see any difficulties in hiring the right people, especially for people in the field of ESG and fintech? And if so, what do you think Hong Kong should do to address perhaps a shortage of talent?
Thank you, Rocky. The key to this question is the right people. So the answer is yes. The financial industry do attract a lot of interest, but the question is whether we are able to attract the right ESG and fintech experts. And what does that mean, right? The right people, meaning having both the hard and the soft skills. They understand ESG and fintech, but also they understand how a bank operates, how we got regulated. And a lot of the historical baggage that most banks have, including us, like we have to deal with legacy system, lengthy processes, and the paramount importance to manage our key risk. So the right candidate would have to process these. Again, in the FSDC paper we're releasing today, there are a number of recommendations the council and this particular working group is proposing to the government and to the other relevant stakeholders. So I won't repeat all those. But Hong Kong can really leverage on the GBA opportunity and the very big asset wealth management market to engage and retain local talent while attracting talent from the mainland and overseas. Because after all, fintech and ESG cuts across everything. But then essentially, we are in a market and in a bigger market, the GBA, which has all these opportunities for us to leverage on what fintech means and what ESG means. We look to joint efforts between the government, financial institutions, and universities to accelerate the adoption of ESG and fintech related curriculum. In particular, encourage cross-faculty collaboration, as both of these, like ESG and fintech, we said many times, are cross-disciplinary in nature. Again, Hong Kong MA has started the ECF, the Enhanced Competency Framework Program, since 2019. And they've actually just started a consultation this month in August on fintech, and it will be rolled out quite soon. Also, the industry is very keen to see ESG being the next. So those are the professional and training that would be made available to engage and to continue to train the talent in the industry.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Zoe. Now, we see some risk, we see some opportunities, and we do see some initiatives being undertaken by various stakeholders. Stephen, I would like to, throw this question to you. Attracting, retaining, grooming, and managing our talent, it's a collective effort, yeah? So what roles do you think each of the stakeholders, such as, the government, university, professional training bodies, and industry itself should play?
Well, we laid out all our thoughts in our report, basically. But the key word there, the operative word, as you said, is the collaboration. It's a collective effort. It's a collaboration among all the stakeholders. Without obviously, the financial bureau, obviously the regulators, we mentioned that. But I think this report also draw out some less discussed areas. For example, we talked about even Labor and Welfare Bureau, where actually they are in charge of the continuing education fund, and because that will be a key lever also for upskill and reskill some of the employees into the fintech and ESG that we discussed, and also the question of where is the role of sort of the Education Bureau in the whole context, because obviously they have the UGC and VTC, that is reporting that basically in their portfolio. So if you have all these sort of different bureaus can work together, so it is an FSDC report, but we hopefully can reach out and sort of ask for a bit more collaborative effort because it does take the whole ecosystem to act together to solve some of the problems and opportunities that we discussed today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stephen. Now, King, this is the final question we have prepared for this panel session. Obviously, you have had a very long career in the banking and financial services industry before joining us as the executive director. Please do let us know if there's anything you wish to add to the earlier questions. But this question is specifically for the FSDC. For that, FSDC has three major mandates. One of those is policy research, the other is market promotion. Then we have human capital development. What has been done in this aspect, and what are some upcoming initiatives?
Thanks for giving me this opportunity to do some promotion. All our speakers have touched on a very key point, that is soft skill. Our target is to introduce the broad variety of opportunities in financial services to young students, university students, young graduates, and professionals. So we have been expanding our Talent Amplifier program, and now we have a three-step approach. First of all, we have a practitioner speaker series, inviting seasoned industry leaders to share their career path and insights. And then we just introduced a fireside chat program, allowing small number of students to have very close interaction with young industry professionals so that they can learn from their real life experience, and how they find their job, and how they realize their ambition, right? And last but not least, we also have arranged internship as well as job shadowing opportunity for students. So hopefully we want to expand this to include other member firms of FSDC. And hopefully once COVID is under control, we can travel again. We want to expand these kind of industry exposure to the GBA area as well, so that the students can really have a first-hand experience what GBA really means to them.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, King. Now, I'm going to start the Q&A session. We have received quite a few very relevant questions from the audience, and I think this is from Jean. Not sure if she is the person whom I'm thinking, but I guess so. Will the new ESG jobs only be filled by business or finance graduates? Is there a role for science or E, S, or G related graduates to take part in this? So, anyone, any taker?
I think obviously the question is, the answer is yes. And one of the questions that we've seen is also mentioned about the UST program, offering the Bachelor of Science in Sustainability and Green Finance. So there are crossovers going on, and obviously, the detailed numbers are not in the report, but when I look at the underlying cross-step data, we asked, obviously the business students are aware of the ESG opportunities, but even for some of the more natural science, the physics majors, they are to a lesser extent, but they are also aware of the opportunities as well. So we hope that, going forward, as we sort of do a bit more promotions, people see that there are different skill sets of people, not just business, but also regulations and, science. A lot of these need to come together, and there will be opportunities for a lot of young people as well.
I think King wants to add something.
In fact, I want to add that actually a lot of engineering students are also interested in sustainability, because now we talk about carbon neutral. Actually, building is actually one of the carbon polluter. So just imagine how many air conditioners we have in Hong Kong. So I understand that some engineering schools are actually introducing certain ESG elements, especially the environmental element in their program. And then we talk about fintech. Now we have climate tech. So that's another new interesting opportunity for our science students as well.
Right. I can add to that as well. I lead the bank work group on ESG, and basically it does cut across all the different departments. So from the lending department, which would be in charge of finance emissions, so-called. So we have to look at our lending policy, and the investing team, like the people who are responsible for investing in that market, they have to also be aware of the green bonds, social bonds market. And then for operations, they have to look at our own emissions. So in carbon emissions, we have the scope 1, 2, and 3. So both ourselves, the electricity we purchased, and also those who finance and in our supply chain. So it essentially cuts across everything. And the skills we need are definitely beyond just a business student skill set.
Thank you. Jeff?
I just probably add the one aspect, the three words E, S, and the G, right? I think one of the thing aspect is the S part, social aspect, right? If we think of the social aspect, the role finance can play in that the S part is around, you talk about your lending aspect. How do you actually elevate certain economic structure or certain strata of certain society or certain community? 1. 2, from the people perspective, right? In terms of the social part, what do we do in terms of bringing a much more inclusive environment for people to thrive, right? Whether it's from a gender, race, or social strata as well. So I think, around the E part, there's a lot of being done. The question is a lot of the S part. I think it requires people from different disciplines to actually bring the S part to the front of the conversation.
As a matter of fact, during our research process, we have heard from some local conglomerates who told us that they really want their students, want their employees to get a sense of a broad spectrum of subjects, not only in accounting or finance or economics and whatnot, but also in engineering matters. And that's why King made a very good point that engineering students should be mindful of the opportunities out there. They do not necessarily need to work for engineering consultants. They can also work for government departments where they are putting more emphasis on ESG related matters, and also in corporates who are putting a lot more emphasis on such subjects too. So now we have another question. I think is from a professor from a reputable university. Well, developing a structured ESG course at undergraduate level will require a dedicated teacher to run a full course, including development of course curriculum, teaching, as well as assessment. Teaching hours are fixed 3 hours times, 11 times during office hours. It's not easy to find an industry practitioner with such time commitment, although it is easier for them to invite a guest speaker to speak for 2 hours or so. So now, will FSDC be able to help identifying potential adjunct teachers in line with your recommendations?
Yes, certainly we'll definitely try our best. I myself are also teaching as an adjunct professor, for asset management and private banking. I really enjoy the experience. And so I'm sure there are a lot of very seasoned industry professionals who really want to contribute back to the society. Definitely, try to line up those volunteers.
Good. Now, this is a very interesting question. Now, our report talked about how to train juniors to know more about fintech and other topics. However, there's reportedly an immigration wave, and so hold on. There's an immigration wave. So how do members of the FSDC evaluate the upcoming impact of immigration to Hong Kong as a leading financial center, as well as its attractiveness to maintain financial professionals working in Hong Kong?
I'll take this question because I've been through at least a couple of these so-called brain drain in the past in Hong Kong. Yes. Short term, it is a concern, but I would like to quote Oak saying that risk and opportunity come hand in hand. So it will also create opportunity for industry practitioners who are committed to Hong Kong, because these will be an opportunity for them to develop their career further. I myself benefited from this. I came back to Hong Kong end of 92, early 93. Because as long as Hong Kong has a very vibrant business environment and condition, as well as the opportunity set that we are all aware of, especially not just GBA, but the internationalization of renminbi, the opening up of the capital account of mainland China, that we talk about, Hong Kong dollar now, right, to coincide with the introduction of ECNY. These are all very exciting opportunities for Hong Kong.
And maybe I can add to that as well, because recently, I've looked at the stats with BA in terms of attrition and the top reasons for people who leave the bank. So I would like to say, actually, most people, they would leave more just still because of whether they feel they get the exposure. So essentially 25% or a quarter of people who leave are feeling that I may not be getting the exposure that I hope to get. So still fintech, ESG, GBA, the whole opportunity with the asset wealth management would still be areas that banks and advice can leverage to retain talent, to ensure that people are feeling they are getting the exposure, they are getting the prospects and the opportunities.
I just want to re-emphasize again, Hong Kong, we are very lucky to have so much opportunity and exposure, given that we only have 7 million people. And that, we rank as one of the top international financial centers in the world. I don't think there is anywhere you can find such abundant opportunities day in, day out.
Well, there are two relatively similar questions from Rebecca and Philip. These questions are talking about how they can potentially identify common ESG courses or training resources, which will be made available to the industry practitioners. I can give you a very short answer. In our report, we have identified many of those. So do take a look at our report. And I'm going to defer that question to a later part if we have adequate time. But there are other very relevant and interesting questions from the audience. This is from Tommy. While EU, UK, and China are taking the lead in ESG investment for years, but Hong Kong has just started. How can local talents compete with those from 3 regions in this area? And how will the government support the talents and the allies? Takers? What is? I think
I'll actually flip it on the and ask not whether the question is whether we have competitiveness. Are there other cities and places and jurisdictions? I would actually look at it that way. Because that's a global trend, and because there are so many competitors out there, and in order to maintain the financial center of Hong Kong globally to be competitive, then we actually need to put a lot more efforts to actually catch up or actually to be as competitive in terms of the ESG talent development. So I think, we have also identified that the regulators are doing quite a lot to actually, catch up. So, I think that the trends are moving forward. So I don't think we are not necessarily very pessimistic. We just need to, try our best to catch up. I think that's what it is. Yeah.
Good. Ivan asked a question about CEF, which is currently not applicable for online courses. This explains why we, in one of our recommendations, recommended that online courses should be applicable too. So I feel that that answer is quite that question is answered. So apart from this is a question from Tommy. Apart from climate risk, does the HKMA or the government have any schedule for other risk under ESG? The government. Apart from climate risk, does the HKMA or the government have any schedule for other risk under ESG? So besides climate risk, I feel that there are other things being done by various regulators. For instance, the exchange, the corporate governance code is something that taking care of the governance part. And there's also disclosure requirements as required by the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And so I feel that there are other efforts being done by various bodies, but if anyone has any...
maybe I'm not sure I'm answering the question or I'm understanding it correctly, but first of all, as one of the banks regulated by Hong Kong MA, I think first of all, a lot of the banks are currently doing climate stress testing, and that's specifically looking at climate risk in ESG. But I think essentially all the consultants and banks are now looking at ESG as much broader, and that it's just an additional layer you have to look at in all your risk. So no matter whether we're looking at climate risk, market risk, operational risk, people risk, is just another layer on top. And also in our most recent conversations with the Hong Kong MA, definitely now we're moving on to a stage where we don't only look at it as a risk, but also as opportunities. And that we need to look at it as how it impacts on our whole business plan and our strategies, and how do we grow our portfolios, and how do we, again, manage our supply chain. So it's really much broader now. So it's really not just risk, it has gone beyond that, because ESG should be not just a risk.
Yes.
Oh, no, actually, it also creates opportunity because I understand there will be an issuance of the very first insurance-linked security in Hong Kong. Those could be catastrophe bonds, related to climate events, to help the financial industry better manage those climate risks.
We do have an array of products and policies across the board to address ESG and fintech related issues. Now, we are, at noon. And so, this webinar really comes to an end. But, in the case that any of our panelists have any last words to say, we can do.
Can I just pick up on one
Sure.
Veronica's question? I think it's a very good question, which is also drives to the heart of our report is a collaborative effort between the academics, which I generally group under sort of the Education Bureau because there are other aspects, for example, the VTC, the Hong Kong QAA, and also the qualification framework generally, and how that's the sort of academics and the industry, where Veronica referred to sort of the professional accreditations can sort of work together. We have seen, for example, obviously in accountancy, right? Accounting, the academics and professional body work together quite well. Engineering, for example, also similar cases where you actually study in school where you get professional qualification afterwards. And so, the tighter are the industry and academics that join the hips, obviously the better in terms of, the alignment going forwards between what they study, the curriculum, as well as the professional certification going forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, I have a request for those of you in the audience. We are going to launch a polling exercise. We hope that, you enjoyed the session, but at the same time, we want you to provide us with such feedback through this polling exercise. But other than that, we thank you very much for joining us, and we hope you enjoy reading our report later.